welcome to the third edition of the Parent News for 2017-18. I'm here with Susy Holloway, our lower school art teacher, and with Erin Lima, one of our parents. Thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
It is.
We're going to talk about nature studies. I hope that many of you had a chance to engage in the nature studies this summer. We had a video that Betty Simpson and her first grade class produced. It was a really wonderful illustration of how to do a nature study. It was, Susy, what do you remember about that video that Betty did?
Well, I loved how it captured the wonder, and I think that's what I want to communicate is nature studies. I feel connects children with nature, and there's a sense of wonder and awe, and just that they were running and look what I found, and there was such a energy and a buzz around, their excitement. That is what I took away.
Yeah.
That it's not just a solemn, quiet, introspective situation. It's full of energy and excitement.
Yeah. We followed the kids out into the 100-acre woods where they picked up objects and then brought them back and painted them, and that was wonderful. So we made this a summer project for a couple of reasons. One was just because it's so important to Trinity's educational philosophy, particularly in the lower school. But we were also interested in trying to see how we might encourage middle school and upper school students and teachers to be part of that as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But we also thought it was a nice application of Annie Crouch's book, which we were reading, and we talked about that last week, or at the last edition of the Parent News. Andy was encouraging us to get off of our devices and do things that required wisdom and courage and skill. And Erin, did you find that this was a project that required those kinds of things?
I did. I feel it did take wisdom in terms of how to approach this in a way that would somehow entice a middle schooler and a high schooler. It took courage for all of us because while we love art, none of us are particularly talented with watercolors. And skill is something that can be a frustrating process to kind of realize, well, I have these visions of how this is going to turn out. And it starts out fun. And then sometimes when your artwork doesn't turn out how you want, that can be frustrating. But how to try it again the following week.
Yeah.
And maybe you're honing a skill, developing a new skill, but to create a love of the process,
Right.
and not just the finished product.
Yeah. I think, Susy, this is a project that's not just about encouraging students to become better artists. It is that, but there's
Right.
much more to it, right?
Right. In fact, when you said not the product, but the process, there's such a tension because I think when you do art, you want the finished product, but really I think the value is in the observation, in, trying to capture what you see with your eyes on the paper. Watercolors can get away from you once you add water. They're very fluid. So it's the skill, it's the observation, and community when you're doing it with others, the challenge of not comparing. So it brings out a lot of
Right.
character issues
Yeah.
at times.
Yeah, that's great. So, Erin, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience. How can you tell us
Sure.
what this was like for you and your family?
Sure. I would say to start off with, this is something that we have painted before as a family, and as just part of our travels as a way to engage with a new place. So this isn't something that was completely foreign to us, but we had not practiced in a while. So when I actually already decided that might be something fun to do as a family this summer, and then I saw the email that was a call to arms for the Charlotte Masons Nature Studies. It was kind of reaffirming something that I'd hoped to bring back into our life as a family. So I was sharing with you, nothing is more inspiring than a fresh case of watercolors. So everyone got a new paintbrush, everyone got a fresh case of watercolors. We were outside, but I brought an outdoor speaker and we had nice music playing and I made a pot of tea just to kind of create this sense of like, we're going to have fun. This is going to be relaxing. This is going to be not something that needs to be stressful or performance-based, but we are just going to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. I was challenging myself. I'm not the best artist, but I really was wanting to slow down and appreciate what was in my own backyard. I have this gypsy heart that tends to wander, and this was something that just kind of helped me see the beauty that is right in my own backyard, hoping to instill that love in my children as well. And each of us had different reactions during that first
Right.
day of painting. I was kind of excited about being with both of my kids for an hour outside, listening to nice music, talking with each other. My son Henry found it frustrating. He loved the music. He loved the tea. The painting part was hard for him.
And Henry is what grade?
He's in ninth grade this year, so that was. But he was great about it. I mean, he had a good attitude. And my daughter Sadie was full steam ahead, super excited to paint, but very quickly found that the constraints of it needs to be something that you found outside, and you're going to paint that. She did one or two of those, and then she's like, "Can I paint lipstick? Can I paint what I have in my mind?" And for me, that was okay because we were still together outside, unplugged, spending time together, creating,
Sure.
taking a break from normal everyday
Yeah.
activities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes the this ideal of the Charlotte Mason nature study in the lake country of England is out there as this thing that we measure ourselves against, and it's always important to come back to the principles and think about why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So being able to riff on that a little bit and do some jazz with it is good. Yeah. One of the things that we've thought about with nature studies is that the act of painting, and I'm sure this is true for other arts as well, but we're thinking about painting today, or the visual arts, they exercise a different part of our brain. And Susy, as an art teacher, and we're here in the Lower School art room today to think about that, do you see that in your work with students, that they, Charlotte Mason like to say, a change is as good as a rest?
Yes.
And so doing something different, very different, like painting, can be actually mentally renewing and refreshing.
I find it personally myself as an artist. I know some students struggle with the core subjects, and I feel like this room is a haven for them. And it is a rest. It's a time to just unwind and just explore. So I do feel that. Yeah.
Was that a part of your experience?
Absolutely. I remember this one part of Andy Crouch's book, if I'm allowed to reference, last week.
Yeah.
He was talking about what defines rest, and reading is restful. Well, as you're still laying on the couch, but if you're watching TV, that's not restful. And that there's certain activities that connotate rest. And one thing that I was hoping for this summer is to not let the summer get away from us and look back and have this regret of like, I wish we had just had more time to relax together. And so having this discipline of we're going to do this together at a certain time once a week this summer when we're home was a gift. And so when I got to the end of the summer, I really did not have a regret about, wow, all the weeks and days got away from us, and I wish we'd had time to relax. I think we all felt rested and restored. That was great.
One other thought is sometimes we think that watching TV or getting on Facebook is restful. It's passive, but it's not always restful and true rest, whereas the nature studies are actually active and we're engaging. And I think it's restorative in a way that being passive and receiving a lot of information is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful essay by Winston Churchill called Painting as a Pastime, and I hope we can put the link up to that on the video so folks could see it. It's not long, but it's a wonderful story of how Churchill, when he left the Admiralty in the First World War, and he had a ton of time on his hands, he accidentally took up painting, and he began to learn to paint. And then he tells a story of how later in his life, so in the Second World War, when he was incredibly busy and stressed, how that painting became for him something he could do that would rest his mind. He said that he wasn't able simply to do nothing, because when he tried to do nothing, everything rushed in upon him, and just the stress wouldn't go away. But to do something so completely different as painting was actually very renewing and restful to him. So, well,
He was so good.
well,
Lucky
he
him.
did have talent. Yeah,
Lucky
that's
him, yeah.
interesting, to see. And
Yeah.
yeah. So another thing that we've talked a little bit about, but I'd like to focus on a little more, is the development of habits of mind, and what kinds of habits these nature studies might develop in students. Susy, what do you think about that? What do you see?
Well, I think the nature studies have a type of painting called dry brush. And I actually learned more wet on wet and a different type in my art studies. So there's the skill in developing over time. I think the emphasis is over time. I'm amazed at what the students can do because of just every year they do, at least probably 3 nature studies.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's a habit. And in the dry brush technique, there are habits. And I know Betty had the video, and it showed, how to blot your brush and how to pick up the paint and how to remove the extra paint. So it's very calming for the students to know the steps. Once they're trained in that part is out of their thinking. It becomes natural. And so I think just the habit of attending the process, paying attention to that, and then observing and paying attention to the subject, it's very focusing and very restful again.
Yeah. Any thoughts on your end about habits that you were challenged with?
Yeah, I think for me, beyond the technical habits that watercolor requires, I think for me it's a habit of being still and of having eyes to see the wonder, having eyes to see the beauty in creation that's right in front of you, and to continue to develop an appetite of wonder in my children and in myself, that you only have to look around you to just see God's glory and to look carefully.
Yeah.
And take more than 2 minutes,
Right.
It does take time. And in that time, you're not wasting any time by studying something a little longer, working a little bit harder on, I can show you an example. I have this,
Let's see some.
this is very vulnerable, but I just trying to get the way that a
wanna
leaf
hold them up
is
so we can
oh,
see?
sure. Well, my hand, I'm nervous, so if you want to hold it. But yeah, just trying to get, okay, well, what is it on this leaf that's different than this leaf?
Yeah.
Taking the time, and in that, you're cultivating just a more watchful eye, more attentive, more appreciative. And so I was hoping that my kids were also, experiencing that. But certainly for me, just as you're trying to capture what's in this one little branch in your huge backyard, I think you can magnify that into life. What's happening in this classroom right now, being watchful as you're driving down the street, just paying more attention.
That's great.
So
Yeah, even just thinking how many greens
Yes.
are in
Yeah.
Sure.
a particular leaf
Yes.
or branch,
Yes.
And how many values of that green,
Yeah.
dark to light. It's a lot of thinking
Yes.
while you're doing it. Yeah.
And then you are imagining the care of our Creator to go into such detail with these things that we can pass by so quickly.
Right.
And He cares deeply about making everything beautiful and detailed. And so it's also just a reflection of God's incredible creativity and genius and glory.
That's great. Yeah, I think about the what Charlotte Mason said about the value of the habit of attentiveness, of just being able to pay attention to something over a sustained period of time, and how that doesn't come naturally to us. We tend to wander, and we have to practice and develop that. And the value that comes with that, Another great story that maybe we can put a link up to is the story of Louis Agassiz, the Harvard zoologist in the 19th century. And there's this great story of one of his students tells of how he went and said to Professor Agassiz, "I want to study zoology under you." And so he gave him a fish, and then he left. And he came back hours later, and the guy had, like 10 minutes, he was done with his fish, right? And
I would have been.
and Professor Agassiz said, look again. And then he left for another 2 hours and came back. And then finally, the student figured out he had a pencil. All he said, all you got is a pencil, paper, and the fish.
Wow.
And he started drawing the fish. And he said that was the point at which he began to turn the corner a little bit and realize, okay, there's more to this fish than I realized. And Professor Agassiz said, yeah, a pencil is one of the best eyes. That to draw something is to teach ourselves to pay really close attention to it. And just the value of that for an education that'll pay dividends for Trinity students, and not just in art classes, but to be able to pay attention to a hard mathematical formula or a difficult text. So yeah, I think there's a lot to that.
I also think in our culture, we do tend to acquire things. And I feel when I paint something, in a way I've acquired it, but I possess it in a different way.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that would be a similar experience, I think, to picture studies, which are studying the art of someone else, and you almost bring it into yourself, so that when a student who's done something like that visits an art museum and sees that original, they feel like they are meeting a friend that they have known at a distance. Yeah, exactly.
That's my Van Gogh.
I love that.
Yes.
So, well, any other thoughts about the value of this experience for the Trinity community as a whole, and how we could continue to encourage folks to be part of these kinds of things over time?
Well, I think the intersection of field biology and science with the nature studies, that's invaluable. I personally love to go out. In 2 weeks, I'm going to go to the beach and have a weekend of nature journaling with the Science Museum. So I think the science part of it can be developed, and already the students have something to hang, what kind of habitats and what kind of creatures and foliage interact. It just spirals out into more discovery. So that intrigues me, and I'm going to be going out with the 5th grade in a few weeks, and we're just going to spend a few hours doing this, collaborating with the teachers, and that excites me. So I think they're going to do more than one nature study, and perhaps a landscape of the area.
It's great.
Yeah.
I love that. I think I was thinking a lot about that last question, and I think for me, what I want the students to know, my children to know, is that a classical education is not a curriculum to be checked off to get through, but a lifestyle to be learned and nurtured.
Yeah.
And so as a community, to be doing that together, we're sending the message to our kids that this is a lifelong appreciation of truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's a great note to end on, I think.
Yes.
I appreciate, Erin, thank you for talking with us, and thanks for
course.
being part of this project this summer. And Susy, for your leadership. Susy prepared a wonderful guide that we can probably show a picture of that helped us all know how to mix colors and do a number of things. So you were really helpful in that, and we appreciate
enjoyed it.
Yeah, great.
you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.